Today's video takes us to the US state of New Hampshire, nestled in the heart of New England. Its quiet countryside and picturesque small towns offer a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of city life. The diverse and abundant wildlife make it a popular destination for hunters and fishermen from across the country. One of the most popular places each hunting season is the Bear Brook State Park, a 10,000-acre nature preserve boasting expansive forests and numerous lakes and waterways. In 1985, a local hunter was walking through the deer trails of Bear Brook, as he had done every deer season for years past. He stumbled across a 55-gallon oil drum from which a strong foul smell was emanating. When he looked inside the drum, he was shocked to see what appeared to be two human bodies in the late stages of decomposition. He immediately called the police, who identified them as two females, one likely in her late 20s and the second a child no older than 10 years. The cause of death was easy to identify: blunt force trauma to the head. Based on their facial bone structure and dental work, forensic investigators were able to make digitally rendered photos of what they believed the victims to look like. They were in black and white, as investigators had no way of determining their hair or eye color. Over the next year, the local police conducted an extensive search, interviewing hundreds of people in the local area, but nobody had seen anything. They looked at national lists of persons reported missing in the past decade, but there were hundreds of people on this list, and due to the limited information they had about the two victims, it was impossible to narrow down the search. As weeks turned into months and months turned into years, with still no actionable leads, the police department eventually gave up. The 1985 Bear Brook murders became a cold case, with the victims still not identified. In the year 2000, more than a decade after the initial discovery, the New Hampshire State Police assigned the case to a new detective. While all of his colleagues had long given up, he couldn't get this mystery out of his mind. The nagging feeling that the killer was still at large eventually motivated him to go out to Bear Brook and take a look at the crime scene himself. He went back to the place where the oil drum was found 15 years prior. Of course, with so much time having passed, any useful evidence had long since decomposed, but he kept hiking around the scene, going far beyond the search zone his predecessors set up 15 years ago. As he went deeper into the forest, he made a shocking discovery: a second oil drum identical in dimensions to the first one. And just like the first drum, this one also contained two female bodies. They were much younger, one of them no older than 5 at the time of death, and the second an infant, probably no older than 1 year. These bodies were also taken to the forensic lab, just like the bodies found in the previous drum. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Given the similarities, the two drums were almost certainly dropped there by the same person around the same time. Now the police knew there was a killer at large who had killed 4 people sometime before 1985 and dumped their bodies in Bear Brook Park. But they still had no leads. They didn't even know if the victims were from New Hampshire. The killer could have driven from out of state to dump the bodies. The case was still as cold as ever. Throughout the 2000s, DNA sequencing technology advanced rapidly. By the early 2010s, DNA could be extracted from bodies in the late stages of decomposition, even decades after the victim died. This gave new hope for thousands of cold cases, including the case of Bear Brook. In 2014, forensic investigators were able to match the DNA of the adult victim to 2 of the 3 children, establishing them as immediate family members. The adult victim could either be the mother, older sister, or aunt of the 2 children, but the third child's DNA was not related, indicating she was not a family member. Based on this information, the most likely conclusion was domestic violence. Assuming the adult victim was the mother, the father may have killed his wife and kids. However, this still wouldn't explain the unrelated middle child, and detectives had no leads as to any of their identities. Investigators would soon be helped by another scientific breakthrough. As it turns out, humans absorb isotopes from the environment. These include hydrogen, oxygen, carbon and nitrogen atoms with different numbers of neutrons. Different geographical areas have different concentrations of certain isotopes. By analyzing the isotopes in someone's body, you can determine where they lived in the months immediately prior to their death. Based on the isotopes in the victims' corpses, forensic scientists determined that they had all lived in the New Hampshire area in the months immediately prior to their deaths. But they also contain different isotopes which are only found in the western parts of the country. So, the victims must have lived in the West and moved to New Hampshire within months of their death. Soon thereafter, the DNA of the middle child, the one not related to the adult victim, was linked to a man named Robert Evans. He was her biological father. Robert Evans was arrested in 2003 in California for the murder of his wife, Ensues. He was sentenced to 15 years. In 2010, he died in prison. What's interesting about Evans is that he was a man of many names. When he married Ensues, he went by the name Larry Vanner. His legal name was Terry Rasmussen, but by that time he hadn't used it for many years. But how did Rasmussen's daughter end up in an oil drum in New Hampshire, and who were the other victims? In 1981, Terry Rasmussen was arrested for abandoning a child in a trailer park in California. At the time, he was going by the alias Robert Evans. The child's name was Lisa, and police first assumed he was Robert's daughter, but a DNA test later revealed Terry was not the father. Robert was sentenced to 3 years in prison for child endangerment and disappeared after his release. Lisa grew up in foster care, never knowing who her real parents were or who was the mysterious Robert Evans who abandoned her in a trailer park. In 1999, Lisa, an adult by now, sent a sample of her DNA to Ancestry.com. On Ancestry.com, Lisa was finally able to find her mother, a woman named Denise Bordin. Denise was reported missing along with her infant daughter Dawn in 1980. Police reports at the time revealed Denise and Dawn were living with a man named Robert Evans at the time of their appearance. Lisa's real name was Dawn Bowden. Police eventually figured out that Robert Evans' real name was Terry Rasmussen. They now suspected he was a serial killer responsible for the deaths of not just Ensues, but also Denise Bordin and the 4 victims from Bear Brook. They released his mugshots and interrogation videos to the public and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. In 2018, this case caught the attention of a Connecticut-based librarian named Rebecca Heath. She spent hours combing through internet message boards and forums about ancestry and missing persons reports. Eventually, she came across a post from a woman in California who was searching for her missing half-sister, Sarah McWaters, who had gone missing in 1978. Sarah's mother, Marlies Honeychurch, as well as Sarah's half-sister Marie, had all gone missing at the same time. Rebecca Heath contacted Sarah McWaters' half-sister, who told her Sarah, Marlies, and Marie had run off with a man named Rasmussen, although she couldn't remember his first name. Rebecca immediately connected the dots and realized this man must be the suspected serial killer, Terry Rasmussen. DNA tests from family members soon confirmed that 3 of the 4 victims in the Bear Brook oil drums were indeed Sarah, Marlies, and Marie. Terry had begun a romantic relationship with Marlies in the 1970s, eventually convincing her to move with him to New Hampshire, along with her 2 daughters. Once in New Hampshire, he killed them all along with his own biological daughter. All we know about the middle child is that she was Rasmussen's daughter. We will likely never know what her name was or who her mother was. Terry eventually came to be known as the Chameleon Killer, inspired by his frequent name changes. He would begin romantic relationships with women, kill them and their children, move to a new location, and then change his name. We know he had at least 6 victims, the 4 in the Bear Brook oil drums, Ensues and Denise Bordin. Because he died in prison in 2010, almost a decade before the extent of his crimes were uncovered, he was never brought to justice. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about the Chameleon Killer? Do you think he had even more victims that we don't know about? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button, as every week we'll bring you more videos of the most shocking true crime cases from around the world.